April 26th, 1:23 a.m. The city of Pripyat is asleep. 50,000 people are in their beds. Some will never live here again. Most don't know it yet. But at this exact moment, their lives are already changing forever. All of them, completely unaware. 3 kilometers away, something is about to go catastrophically, permanently, irreversibly wrong. And when it does, the government will spend the next 36 hours pretending it didn't happen. This is Declassified. Bedroom lights are off. A night shift worker is heading home. A mother is checking on her sleeping child. Nobody is looking toward reactor number 4. Nobody knows they should be. Right now, 1:23 in the morning, the operators on duty are running a test, a routine safety test. They've done tests like this before, nothing dangerous. At least, that's what they were told. The test is designed to check how long the turbines can continue powering the reactor's cooling pumps after a loss of main electrical power. Simple. But here's what those operators didn't know. The reactor they were standing in front of, the RBMK-1000, had a design flaw. A flaw so serious, so dangerous, that Soviet nuclear engineers had written internal memos about it years before this night. A nuclear safety bill had been drafted in the Soviet Union 2 years before this disaster. 2 years. And it was never implemented. Not because they didn't know, but because of bureaucracy, because of politics, because admitting the flaw meant admitting the Soviet nuclear program had a problem, and that was simply not allowed. So the operators ran the test, following procedures, following orders, doing exactly what they were told to do. Power dropped suddenly, much lower than expected. The operators tried to stabilize it. They raised the control rods. They adjusted the systems, and then, at 1:23 a.m., an operator made a decision that should have saved the reactor. He reached for the AZ5 button, the emergency shutdown. In every training manual, this was the safe option. Press the button, stop the reaction, end the danger. Before I tell you what happened when he pressed that button, you need to understand something that the Soviet government had been hiding for years, because what was about to go wrong was not an accident. As the control rods began lowering into the reactor core, the RBMK's fatal design flaw activated. The tips of those control rods, instead of immediately slowing the reaction, actually accelerated it. For a brief, critical moment, the reactor didn't slow down. It surged. Power spiked to more than 10 times the normal operating level. In under 3 seconds, the fuel rods shattered. Superheated steam built up instantly, and the pressure had nowhere to go. In approximately 1.2 seconds, the reactor temperature went from 300 degrees Celsius to over 2,000 degrees Celsius. First explosion sound. The first explosion tore through the reactor building. The 1,000-ton steel and concrete lid of the reactor, a structure heavier than most aircraft, was blasted clean off. Fuel channels ruptured. 2 workers died instantly, not from radiation, from the sheer force of the blast. 3 seconds later, massive second explosion sound. The second explosion, more powerful than the first, estimated at the equivalent of 225 tons of TNT. The reactor core itself was destroyed. Burning graphite and fuel fragments were thrown into the air. The core was now open, burning, exposed to the sky, and releasing radioactive material directly into the atmosphere. It was 1:24 a.m. The worst nuclear disaster in human history had just begun, and in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to tell you exactly what the government did, or rather, what they didn't do, because the explosion was only the first disaster. And what did the Soviet government do? Nothing. Minutes after the blast, firefighters arrived. They climbed onto the roof without protective suits. Some picked up chunks of black graphite with their bare hands. They didn't know those pieces had come from the reactor core itself. Many would be dead within weeks. At 2 a.m., 1 hour after the explosion, the city of Pripyat was completely silent. No sirens, no announcements, no evacuation order. Families were sleeping, with their windows open, on a warm spring night, breathing in air that was already becoming contaminated. People stood on balconies watching a strange glow in the distance. Some even brought their children outside to watch. They had no idea they were standing beneath radioactive fallout. By 6 a.m., 30 people had been hospitalized with symptoms of acute radiation syndrome, skin blistering, vomiting, severe burns. Their bodies were already breaking down from exposure, and still, nothing. The Soviet government knew. They knew within hours. The plant managers had already called Moscow. Reports had already been filed, but the information was classified. Almost immediately, noon arrived. 36 hours would pass before the evacuation order finally came. And when it came, it said something that seems almost cruel in hindsight. Temporary evacuation. Return within 3 days. They told people to pack lightly, to take only what they needed for a few days. Children were carrying toys. Families were leaving food on their tables, thinking they'd be back by the weekend. The declassified KGB memos tell a different story. The government already knew. This was not a 3-day evacuation. They already knew the contamination was severe. But announcing a permanent evacuation of 50,000 people from a major Soviet city, that would cause panic. That would cause questions. That would cause the world to ask what had actually happened inside that reactor. So they lied. But here's the part that nobody talks about. The Soviet Union thought they had contained the secret. They were wrong, because 1,100 kilometers away, in a completely different country, someone was about to expose everything. April 28th, 2 days after the explosion, Sweden, a nuclear power plant called Forsmark, about 1,100 kilometers away from Chernobyl. A worker walks through a routine radiation checkpoint. He scans his shoes. At first, they thought the detector was broken. Then another alarm sounded, and another. Suddenly, nobody was asking whether radiation existed. They were asking where it was coming from. The plant goes into emergency protocol. They think there's a leak inside their own facility. But after hours of checking, they find nothing wrong with Forsmark. Nothing at all. So they check the wind patterns, and the radiation isn't coming from Sweden. It's coming from the east, from the Soviet Union. The Swedish government immediately contacts Moscow. Their message is direct. We are detecting dangerous levels of radiation in our territory. What happened? And the Soviet response came quickly. Everything is fine. The declassified Politburo protocols, released publicly in 2019 by the National Security Archive, reveal exactly what was happening inside the Soviet government. During those first 36 hours, the first Politburo meeting to specifically address Chernobyl didn't even happen until April 29th, 3 days after the explosion. And when they did meet, the primary discussion wasn't about public health. It wasn't about evacuation. It wasn't about getting medical help to the people who were already dying. It was about controlling what the world was allowed to know. A formal memo issued on July 28, 1986, now declassified, explicitly listed categories of information forbidden from publication anywhere in the Soviet Union: the radiation situation, the contamination levels, the scale of decontamination work, and radioactive contamination of food and water, exceeding permissible concentrations. They were hiding information about contaminated food, while Soviet citizens in Ukraine and Belarus were eating vegetables from contaminated soil, while children were drinking contaminated milk, while pregnant women were being exposed to radiation that would damage generations to come. And the official death toll, the Soviet government announced 2 deaths, just 2. Meanwhile, in Moscow, hospital number 6, 28 more people were dying from acute radiation syndrome, but their medical records were being altered. Causes of death were being changed. Not radiation, not Chernobyl. Heart failure, respiratory complications, burns from unspecified causes, classified, buried, hidden. And if you think that was the worst of it, wait until you hear what they did to the 200,000 people they sent directly into the disaster zone. What do we actually know now? After decades of declassified documents and independent research, the official Soviet figure was 31 deaths. That number stood for years as the internationally accepted toll. The United Nations, after 2 decades of research, estimated at least 4,000 deaths from long-term radiation effects. In the next episode, we go deeper into the lie. We look at exactly how the Soviet government manipulated the official death count, how medical records were altered, how scientists who tried to speak the truth were silenced, and how the cover-up didn't end when the Soviet Union collapsed. In many ways, it's still continuing today. This is Declassified.